CEO discovers his daughter begging for baby formula. Story outline. Story outline, 3 parts, 1500 words each. Part 1, The Unexpected Discovery. Characters. Marcus Blackstone, 45-year-old tech CEO, cold and business-focused. Violet Rose, 23-year-old struggling young mother, his unknown daughter. Baby Emma, 6-month-old infant, Violet's daughter. Catherine Blackstone, Marcus's deceased wife who kept family secrets. Outline: Marcus encounters a desperate young woman begging outside his office building during a rainstorm. When he offers help, he discovers shocking family connections that turn his world upside down. Violet reveals she is his daughter, abandoned years ago, now struggling to feed her own baby. Part 2, The Painful Truth. Characters. Marcus Blackstone, grappling with newfound fatherhood. Violet Rose, torn between pride and desperate need. Detective James Morton, family friend who reveals hidden truths. Helena Sterling, Marcus's former secretary who knew the secret. Outline: Marcus investigates Violet's claims and uncovers painful family secrets. His late wife Catherine had an affair and gave birth to Violet, but chose to abandon her to protect their marriage and Marcus's business reputation. The truth devastates Marcus as he realizes his daughter has suffered while he lived in luxury. Part 3, The Path to Redemption. Characters. Marcus Blackstone, determined to make amends. Violet Rose, learning to trust and forgive. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, child psychologist helping the family heal. Thomas Chen, Marcus's business partner supporting the reunion. Outline: Marcus works to earn Violet's trust while providing for her and baby Emma. Through counseling and genuine efforts to connect, the broken family slowly heals. Marcus transforms from a cold businessman into a caring father and grandfather, finding purpose beyond profit. Part 1, The Unexpected Discovery. The storm that changed everything. The autumn rain hammered against the glass walls of Blackstone Tower with relentless fury, each drop a tiny messenger of the storm brewing both outside and within the heart of the man who owned the building. Marcus Blackstone stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor, his steel-gray eyes surveying the city below through sheets of cascading water. At 45, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small software company into a multinational technology corporation worth billions. Yet tonight, something felt different. Something felt hollow. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his brooding thoughts. "Mr. Blackstone, your car is waiting," came the crisp voice of his assistant. Marcus glanced at his Rolex, noting it was past 9 in the evening. Another late night, another day consumed by profit margins and board meetings. He gathered his briefcase and headed toward the elevator, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished marble floors. An encounter in the rain. As Marcus stepped out of the building's grand entrance, he was immediately struck by the sight of a young woman huddled beneath the building's overhang. She sat on the cold concrete, clutching something wrapped in a tattered pink blanket. Her dark hair was soaked despite her makeshift shelter, and her thin frame shook from both cold and something deeper, desperation. What caught Marcus's attention most intensely was not her obvious distress, but the way she held herself. Even in her vulnerable state, there was a dignity about her posture, a pride that refused to be completely broken. She looked up as he approached, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Hers were a striking shade of green, rimmed with exhaustion but holding a fierce determination that seemed oddly familiar. "Excuse me," Marcus found himself saying, though he typically avoided such encounters. "Are you all right?" The question felt strange on his lips. When had he last shown genuine concern for a stranger's welfare? The young woman's eyes darted away, her grip tightening on the bundle in her arms. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her words. It cracked with emotion and fatigue. "Just waiting for the rain to stop." Marcus noticed his driver waiting patiently by the idling black sedan, but something compelled him to linger. "What's your name?" he asked gently, crouching down to her level despite his expensive suit. "Violet," she replied hesitantly. "Violet Rose." The name struck him like a physical blow, though he couldn't immediately understand why. There was something about the way she said it, the slight tremor in her voice, that awakened a memory buried deep in his subconscious. The desperate plea. The bundle in Violet's arms stirred, and a soft whimper escaped from within the pink blanket. Marcus realized with a start that she was holding a baby. The infant's cries grew stronger, and Violet's composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, mixing with the raindrops that continued to fall. "She's hungry," Violet whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. "I haven't been able to buy formula in 2 days. I've been trying to make what I have last, but—" Her voice trailed off as she looked down at the baby with an expression of pure anguish. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Without hesitation, he reached into his wallet and pulled out several $100 bills. "Here," he said, extending the money toward her. "Buy whatever you need for the baby." Violet stared at the money for a long moment, her pride warring with her desperation. Finally, she looked up at him with those haunting green eyes. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Maybe that's exactly why," Marcus replied, surprised by his own honesty. "Sometimes strangers are the only ones who can see clearly." As Violet slowly reached for the money, her hand brushed against his. The contact was brief, but it sent an unexpected jolt through Marcus. There was something about this young woman that felt significant, though he couldn't place what it was. The shocking revelation. "Thank you," Violet said softly, clutching the money as if it were a lifeline. "I'll pay you back somehow. I promise." Marcus waved away her concern. "That's not necessary. Just take care of your baby." He paused, then added, "What's her name?" "Emma," Violet replied, pulling back the blanket slightly to reveal a tiny face with delicate features and wispy brown hair. "She's 6 months old." As Marcus looked down at the infant, he felt another strange pang of recognition. The baby's features were soft and undefined, as most infants were, but there was something about the shape of her eyes, the curve of her tiny lips, that seemed familiar. "She's beautiful," he said genuinely. "You must be very proud." Violet's expression softened for the first time since their conversation began. "She's everything to me. I'd do anything for her, even." She gestured vaguely at their surroundings, encompassing her desperate situation. "Even beg on the street," Marcus finished quietly, understanding flooding through him. He had judged such people harshly in the past, dismissing them as lazy or seeking handouts. Now, seeing the fierce love in this young mother's eyes, he realized how wrong he had been. The rain began to lighten, and Marcus knew he should be heading home. Yet something kept him rooted to the spot. "Violet," he said carefully, "forgive me for asking, but do you have family? Someone who could help you?" The young woman's expression darkened, and she looked away. "My mother died when I was 15. I've been on my own since then." She paused, then added quietly, "Well, mostly on my own." "What about Emma's father?" Marcus asked, though he sensed the answer might be painful. Violet's laugh was bitter and hollow. "He left when he found out I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility." She looked down at her daughter with infinite tenderness. His loss. The moment of truth. As Marcus prepared to leave, Violet suddenly spoke again, her voice barely audible above the diminishing rain. "My mother used to work for a big company downtown. She was a secretary there for many years before she got sick." Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. "Which company?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Blackstone Technologies," Violet replied, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "She worked for a man named Marcus Blackstone. She said he was kind to her, even when others weren't." The world seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. His mind raced through memories, searching for connections. Catherine, his late wife, had mentioned a secretary named Rose who had left the company suddenly. He had never paid much attention to the details, too focused on business to concern himself with personnel matters. "What was your mother's name?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. "Rose." "Rose Sterling," Violet replied. She always spoke highly of Mr. Blackstone, even though. She trailed off, seeming to reconsider her words. "Even though what?" Marcus pressed, though he feared the answer. Violet looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust him with something significant. Finally, she spoke, her words hitting him like a thunderbolt. "Even though he never knew about me." She said he was a good man who deserved better than the lies he was told. Violet's voice grew stronger, more determined. "My mother told me the truth before she died. Marcus Blackstone is my father." The revelation hung in the air between them like a living thing. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet as the implications crashed over him. This young woman, this desperate mother begging in the rain, was claiming to be his daughter. His mind immediately went to Catherine, his beloved wife who had died 3 years ago from cancer. Had she known? Had she kept this secret from him? "That's impossible," Marcus whispered, but even as he spoke the words, he was studying Violet's face more carefully. The shape of her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, features that seemed to echo his own. Violet nodded, as if she had expected his denial. "I know how it sounds. But my mother kept everything, letters, photos, documents. She never asked for anything from him, never tried to contact him after she left the company. She said his wife made it clear that I would never be welcome in their world." The mention of Catherine sent another jolt through Marcus. His wife had been fiercely protective of their family's reputation, their social standing. She had also been struggling with infertility during those years, a source of deep pain for both of them. If she had discovered that Marcus had a child with another woman, even unknowingly, it would have devastated her. "I don't want anything from you," Violet continued, misinterpreting his silence as rejection. "I just thought you should know that you have a granddaughter. That despite everything, part of you continues on." Marcus looked down at baby Emma, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms despite the chaos surrounding them. If Violet was telling the truth, and his instincts told him she was, then this tiny being carried his blood, his legacy. The thought was both terrifying and wonderfully overwhelming. "We need to talk," Marcus said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Not here, not like this. Let me take you somewhere warm, somewhere safe, and we'll figure this out together." Violet hesitated, her earlier desperation now replaced by wariness. "I don't want your pity or your charity." "This isn't about charity," Marcus replied firmly. "If what you're saying is true, then I have 23 years of fatherhood to make up for. And my granddaughter deserves better than to grow up the way you did, alone and struggling." As they stood there in the diminishing rain, two strangers connected by blood and separated by years of secrets, Marcus felt something fundamental shift within himself. For the first time in his adult life, money and business success seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of family, of connection, of love. The storm was passing, but Marcus realized that his life was about to be forever changed by this unexpected encounter. Whatever truth lay ahead, whatever pain or joy awaited them, he knew there was no going back to the man he had been just an hour before. Violet looked at him searchingly, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's talk." 3 days had passed since Marcus's world-altering encounter with Violet Rose. He had provided her with a comfortable hotel suite and ensured that baby Emma had everything she needed, but the questions plaguing his mind demanded answers. The successful businessman who had built his empire on facts and evidence could not simply accept such a momentous revelation without thorough investigation. Marcus sat in his private study, surrounded by documents and photographs that his personal investigator had compiled. Detective James Morton, a former police officer who had become Marcus's trusted friend over the years, spread the evidence across the mahogany desk with the precision of someone accustomed to delivering difficult truths. "The timeline matches perfectly," Detective Morton said, his weathered face serious as he pointed to a hospital record. Rose Sterling gave birth to Violet Rose 23 years ago, approximately 9 months after she left Blackstone Technologies. The birth certificate lists no father, which was common in cases where paternity was disputed or unknown. Marcus examined the document with trembling hands. The stark black text on official letterhead made the reality undeniable. Rose Sterling had indeed given birth to a daughter during the exact period when she would have been carrying his child, assuming Violet's claims were accurate. "What else did you discover about Rose?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. His memories of his former secretary were vague, clouded by years of focusing exclusively on business matters and his troubled marriage to Catherine. Detective Morton opened a manila folder, revealing photographs that made Marcus's heart clench. Rose Sterling had been a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Even in the formal employee identification photo, there was a warmth about her that Marcus now recognized in her daughter. "Rose Sterling worked for your company for 3 years," Detective Morton continued. "According to employment records, she was an exemplary employee, punctual, reliable, and well-regarded by her supervisors. She left abruptly in March of that year, citing personal reasons. No forwarding address was provided, and she declined her final paycheck." The pieces were beginning to form a picture that Marcus found increasingly difficult to deny. "What about Catherine?" he asked quietly. "What did she know?" Detective Morton's expression grew even more somber. "That's where the investigation becomes more complicated, Marcus. I spoke with Helena Sterling, your former head of security. She revealed some troubling information about your late wife's involvement in Rose's departure. The secretary's secret." Helena Sterling had been reluctant to speak about events from over 2 decades ago, but Detective Morton's persistence and Marcus's desperation for the truth had eventually convinced her to share what she knew. The revelation came during a private meeting in Marcus's office, with Helena appearing visibly uncomfortable as she prepared to expose long-buried secrets. "Mr. Blackstone," Helena began, her voice carefully controlled, "what I'm about to tell you may be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth about what happened to Rose Sterling." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. The weight of impending revelation pressed down upon him like a physical force. Helena continued, her words measured and precise. "Mrs. Catherine Blackstone discovered Rose's pregnancy approximately 2 months before Rose left the company. Rose had confided in me about her condition and her fears about the father's identity. She was certain that you were the father, Mr. Blackstone, based on a brief encounter that had occurred during the company Christmas party." The memory hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. The Christmas party 24 years ago had been a lavish affair, and he recalled drinking more than usual due to the stress of his deteriorating marriage with Catherine. There had been a moment with Rose, a conversation that had led to something more intimate, something he had dismissed as a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by alcohol and loneliness. "Catherine confronted Rose directly," Helena continued. "She offered Rose a substantial sum of money to leave the company and never contact you again. Mrs. Blackstone made it clear that any attempt to claim paternity or seek support would result in legal action and public humiliation." Marcus felt nauseous as the full picture emerged. Catherine, the woman he had loved and mourned, had known about his daughter all along. She had chosen to protect their marriage and social standing by essentially banishing a pregnant woman who had no resources to fight back. "Rose accepted the money?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Helena shook her head sadly. "Rose refused the money, Mr. Blackstone. She said she wanted nothing from your family except the knowledge that her child would know the truth about her father someday. Mrs. Blackstone then informed Rose that if she remained in the city or attempted any contact, she would ensure that Rose would never find employment anywhere in the state." The cruelty of Catherine's actions struck Marcus with devastating force. His wife had not merely paid off a potential problem, she had systematically destroyed Rose's ability to support herself and her unborn child. The woman he had believed to be principled and caring had revealed herself capable of heartless manipulation. The mother's struggle. Detective Morton had traced Rose Sterling's life after her departure from Blackstone Technologies, and the story that emerged was one of quiet heroism in the face of overwhelming adversity. Rose had moved to a small town 3 hours away, where she had given birth to Violet and raised her daughter while working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Rose never married, Detective Morton reported, consulting his notes. She worked as a waitress, a cleaning lady, and eventually managed to earn her high school equivalency diploma. She saved every penny she could to ensure Violet had opportunities she herself had never received. Marcus studied photographs of Rose and young Violet that Detective Morton had obtained from former neighbors. The images showed a devoted mother and a bright, curious child who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Marcus himself. Violet's green eyes, which had seemed so familiar during their first encounter, were clearly inherited from her mother, but the shape of her face and the determined set of her jaw were distinctly Blackstone traits. Rose became ill when Violet was 15, Detective Morton continued. Cancer, according to medical records. She fought it for 2 years while working to support her daughter and pay for treatment. The medical bills consumed their savings and forced them into poverty. The tragedy of Rose's situation became increasingly clear as Detective Morton detailed her final years. A woman who had been punished for a moment of intimacy with her employer had spent her entire adult life struggling to survive while raising his daughter alone. She had never sought help, never tried to contact Marcus, and had died believing that he was better off not knowing about Violet's existence. Before she died, Detective Morton said softly, Rose told Violet the truth about her father. She gave her daughter all the documentation she had kept over the years, employment records, photographs, even a letter she had written to you but never sent. Rose made Violet promise never to contact you unless she had no other choice. The weight of this revelation crushed Marcus's remaining composure. Violet had not approached him out of greed or opportunism, she had come to him in desperation, having exhausted every other option. Her pride and independence, so evident during their first meeting, were traits inherited from a mother who had refused charity and chosen dignity over comfort. Confronting the past. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his study, staring at a framed photograph of Catherine that had occupied a place of honor on his desk for years. The woman smiling back at him from the silver frame now seemed like a stranger. How had he been so blind to her capacity for cruelty? How had he failed to see past the polished exterior to the calculating heart beneath? His phone rang, interrupting his brooding thoughts. Violet's name appeared on the caller identification, and Marcus answered immediately. "Hello, Violet," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of newly discovered truths. "Mr. Blackstone," Violet replied formally, though there was uncertainty in her tone. "I wanted to thank you again for your help, but I also need to discuss our situation. I've been thinking about what I told you the other night, and I realize how difficult this must be for you to accept." Marcus closed his eyes, drawing strength from the knowledge that he finally understood the full scope of what had transpired. "Violet, I've spent the last 3 days investigating your claims. I know about your mother, about what happened when she worked for my company, and about how she was treated when she tried to do the right thing." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a soft intake of breath. "You know about Catherine," Violet said quietly. It was not a question. "Yes," Marcus replied. "I know about my wife's role in driving your mother away. I know about the threats and the systematic campaign to ensure that Rose could never return or contact me. I also know that your mother spent her entire adult life struggling to provide for you while protecting me from a truth I should have been allowed to face." Violet's voice was barely a whisper when she responded. "She never spoke ill of you, even when things were at their worst. She said you were a good man who had been deceived by someone who was supposed to love you. She made me promise to remember that if I ever met you." The generosity of Rose's spirit, even in her suffering, struck Marcus with renewed force. A woman who had every reason to harbor resentment had instead chosen to protect his reputation and his memory in the eyes of their daughter. "I failed both of you," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I failed to see what was happening in my own company, failed to protect someone who deserved better, and failed to be the father you needed for 23 years. You didn't know," Violet replied softly. That's what made it so terrible for my mother. She said the worst part was knowing that you would have done the right thing if you had been given the chance. Marcus wiped away tears he had not realized were falling. The conversation continued for another hour, with Violet sharing memories of her mother and Marcus beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been stolen from all of them. By the time they ended the call, both father and daughter were emotionally exhausted but closer to understanding each other. The weight of truth. The following morning, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. He arranged for Catherine's portrait to be removed from his office and placed in storage. The woman he had mourned as a devoted wife had revealed herself to be someone far different from the person he had believed her to be. Detective Morton arrived with additional documentation that further confirmed Violet's paternity. DNA testing would provide final scientific proof, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Marcus was indeed Violet's father, and baby Emma was his granddaughter. What will you do now? Detective Morton asked as they concluded their final meeting on the investigation. Marcus looked out the window of his office, watching the city bustle with activity below. For decades, he had viewed the world from this elevated position, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers. Now, the most important decision of his life involved just 3 people: himself, his daughter, and his granddaughter. I'm going to try to be the father I should have been 23 years ago, Marcus replied. I'm going to ensure that Violet and Emma never want for anything, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making amends for the failures of the past. Detective Morton nodded approvingly. Rose Sterling would be proud to see her daughter finally receiving the recognition and support she deserves. As Marcus prepared for the most important conversation of his life, the one where he would formally acknowledge Violet as his daughter and Emma as his granddaughter, he reflected on the profound changes that had occurred in his understanding of family, responsibility, and love. The successful businessman who had prided himself on control and certainty had discovered that the most meaningful aspects of life often arise from unexpected encounters and long-buried truths. The rain that had brought Violet into his life had washed away more than the dust of the city. It had cleansed his soul of illusions and prepared him for the challenging but rewarding journey of rebuilding the family connections that had been severed by pride, deception, and fear. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus's devastating discoveries about his late wife's deception and his daughter's tragic past. The DNA test results had arrived that morning, providing scientific confirmation of what his heart had already accepted: Violet Rose was indeed his daughter, and baby Emma carried the Blackstone bloodline. Marcus held the laboratory report in his hands, studying the statistical certainty that changed everything about his understanding of family and responsibility. The initial euphoria of discovering his daughter had given way to the complex reality of building a relationship with someone who had every reason to distrust him. Violet had agreed to regular meetings, but her wariness remained evident in every interaction. She accepted his financial support for Emma's immediate needs while maintaining careful boundaries around her own independence. Marcus had arranged for Violet and Emma to move into a comfortable apartment in a safe neighborhood, but Violet had insisted on paying rent through a job she had secured at a local marketing firm. The parallels to her mother's fierce independence were unmistakable, and Marcus found himself both proud of and frustrated by his daughter's determination to stand on her own feet. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the family counselor Marcus had engaged to help navigate their unprecedented situation, had warned him that trust would need to be earned through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. The therapeutic sessions, which Violet had initially resisted, had become a neutral ground where father and daughter could explore their complicated emotions without the weight of expectation or judgment. Trust is not rebuilt through apologies or explanations, Dr. Hayes had counseled during one of their joint sessions. Trust is rebuilt through reliability, consistency, and the demonstrated commitment to prioritize the relationship over personal comfort or convenience. Marcus had taken these words to heart, establishing a routine of regular visits that respected Violet's schedule and boundaries. He arrived precisely when he said he would, stayed for the agreed-upon duration, and never pushed for more intimacy than Violet was prepared to offer. These small acts of respect and reliability were slowly creating the foundation for something deeper. The grandfather's awakening. The most natural connection in this complicated family dynamic had emerged between Marcus and baby Emma. The 6-month-old infant had no knowledge of the painful history that created barriers between the adults in her life. When Marcus held his granddaughter for the first time, feeling her tiny fingers wrap around his thumb, he experienced an overwhelming sense of protective love that transcended all the complications of their circumstances. Emma's presence had awakened something in Marcus that he had not realized was dormant. During his marriage to Catherine, their inability to have children had created a persistent sadness that he had learned to suppress. Now, holding his granddaughter and watching her respond to his voice with curious eyes and spontaneous smiles, Marcus discovered a capacity for unconditional love that had remained hidden for decades. Violet had begun to relax slightly during these interactions, observing Marcus's genuine delight in Emma's company. The sight of her father gently bouncing the baby or patiently attempting to coax smiles from her seemed to soften some of Violet's defensive walls. These moments provided glimpses of the man Marcus might have been if circumstances had been different, if he had been allowed to be present for Violet's childhood. "She likes you," Violet had observed during one of their recent visits, her tone carrying a note of surprised approval. "Emma doesn't usually take to strangers so easily." Marcus had looked up from where he was sitting on the floor, allowing Emma to grasp his fingers while she practiced sitting upright. "Maybe she recognizes something familiar," he had replied softly. "Maybe she knows we're family." The comment had brought tears to Violet's eyes, though she had quickly looked away to hide her emotional response. These moments of vulnerability were becoming more frequent, suggesting that beneath her carefully maintained composure, Violet was struggling with her own desire for connection and belonging. Professional collaboration and personal growth. Thomas Chen, Marcus's business partner and closest friend within the company, had become an unexpected ally in the process of family reconciliation. When Marcus had confided the truth about Violet's identity, Thomas had immediately understood the significance of the situation and offered his support in navigating the personal and professional implications. "You've been given an extraordinary second chance," Thomas had observed during one of their private conversations. "The question is whether you're prepared to change your life fundamentally enough to deserve it." The challenge Thomas had presented was more profound than Marcus had initially realized. Building a relationship with Violet and Emma required more than financial support or scheduled visits. It required a fundamental shift in his priorities and his understanding of what constituted a meaningful life. Marcus had begun delegating more responsibilities within the company, creating space in his schedule for the regular presence that family relationships required. The transition had been challenging for someone accustomed to controlling every aspect of his business empire, but the rewards had been immediately apparent. His increased availability had allowed for spontaneous moments with Emma and longer conversations with Violet that gradually deepened their mutual understanding. The most significant breakthrough had occurred during a family dinner that Marcus had prepared himself in his penthouse apartment. Violet had initially declined the invitation, expressing discomfort with the opulent surroundings that represented the luxury she had been denied throughout her life. Marcus had persisted gently, explaining that he wanted to cook for his daughter and granddaughter as a way of expressing care through action rather than expensive gifts or elaborate gestures. The evening had begun awkwardly, with Violet appearing tense and out of place in the elegant dining room. However, as Marcus served the simple meal he had prepared and they began sharing stories about Emma's developing personality and interests, the conversation had gradually become more natural and relaxed. "My mother used to make pasta like this," Violet had commented, twirling the linguine around her fork. "She said it was her grandmother's recipe from Italy." The connection to Rose Sterling had opened a new avenue for conversation, allowing Marcus to learn more about the woman who had raised his daughter with such grace and determination. Violet had shared memories of her mother's creativity in making holidays special despite their limited resources, her dedication to ensuring that Violet received a good education, and her unwavering optimism in the face of mounting difficulties. The healing power of shared experience. Dr. Hayes had suggested that Marcus and Violet might benefit from engaging in activities that created positive shared experiences rather than focusing exclusively on processing the painful history that had brought them together. The recommendation had led to tentative experiments in normal family activities that neither of them had previously experienced together. Marcus had accompanied Violet and Emma to a pediatric appointment, experiencing the routine responsibilities of caring for a young child that he had missed during Violet's infancy and childhood. Sitting in the waiting room, watching Violet comfort Emma before her vaccinations, Marcus had gained new appreciation for the countless small acts of love and protection that constitute daily parenting. The most meaningful shared experience had occurred during a weekend visit to a local farmer's market. Marcus had suggested the outing as a way to shop for fresh ingredients for another home-cooked meal, but the simple act of walking together through the market stalls had created opportunities for casual conversation and spontaneous interaction that felt remarkably natural. Violet had relaxed noticeably in the informal environment, pointing out vegetables that Emma found interesting and sharing her knowledge about selecting the best produce. Marcus had found himself genuinely enjoying the ordinary domestic activity, recognizing that these simple moments represented the foundation of family connection that had been absent from his previous life. Emma loves the colors, Violet had observed, watching her daughter reach toward a display of bright red tomatoes. I think she's going to be artistic like her grandmother was. The casual reference to Rose Sterling's artistic abilities had provided another opportunity for Marcus to learn about the woman whose life had been so profoundly affected by his unwitting actions. Violet had explained that her mother had been a talented painter who had given up her artistic ambitions to focus on providing financial stability for her daughter. The promise of tomorrow. As the weeks had progressed, the relationship between Marcus and Violet had evolved from cautious cooperation to something approaching genuine affection. The process had been neither smooth nor predictable, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs that reflected the complexity of their situation. However, the consistent commitment that both had demonstrated to building something positive for Emma's sake had gradually created space for their own healing and connection. Marcus had begun to understand that redemption was not a destination but rather an ongoing process of choosing to prioritize relationships over personal comfort, love over pride, and presence over productivity. The successful businessman who had once measured his worth through financial achievements had discovered that his most important legacy would be measured through the quality of his relationships with his daughter and granddaughter. Violet had also experienced profound changes during this period of family reconstruction. The young woman who had been forced to rely entirely on her own resources had begun to accept that allowing others to care for her and Emma did not represent weakness or failure. The gradual development of trust in Marcus's commitment had allowed her to envision possibilities for her future that extended beyond mere survival. The most encouraging sign of progress had emerged during their most recent counseling session, when Violet had spontaneously referred to Marcus as "Dad" while discussing Emma's developmental milestones. The slip had been unconscious, but its significance was unmistakable to everyone present. Dr. Hayes had noted that such natural expressions of familial connection indicated that the relationship was becoming integrated into Violet's emotional understanding of her identity and relationships. Healing occurs when we can envision a future that differs from our past, Dr. Hayes had explained during their final joint session. Both of you have demonstrated the courage to risk vulnerability in service of creating something new and meaningful together. As Marcus prepared for Emma's first birthday celebration, which would mark nearly 6 months since his life-changing encounter with Violet in the rain, he reflected on the transformation that had occurred in all their lives. The lonely businessman who had measured success through profit margins had discovered that his greatest achievement would be the family he was still learning to love and cherish. The birthday party would be small and intimate, attended by the few people who had supported their journey toward reconciliation. Thomas Chen would be there, along with Dr. Hayes and Helena Sterling, who had become an unexpected ally in their healing process. Most importantly, it would be a celebration of the future they were building together rather than a commemoration of the painful past they had overcome. Standing in his kitchen, preparing Emma's birthday cake with Violet's patient guidance, Marcus realized that the rain that had brought them together had indeed washed away more than the dust of the city. It had cleansed his understanding of what truly mattered in life and prepared him for the most important role he would ever play, that of father and grandfather to the family he had unknowingly lost and miraculously found again.